A new report says the Department of Justice is instructing its attorneys to drop the term undocumented immigrants and instead use the controversial phrase illegal aliens. That's according to a DOJ email obtained by CNN.
Why? This comes just one day before the government's deadline to reunite more than 2,500 migrant children taken from their parents at the border. And it says that it will meet the deadline, but only for families that are eligible to be reunited. The Justice Department says 1,637 parents are eligible for reunification. Of those, more than 1,000 have already been reunited, and the balance is expected to be completed by tomorrow's deadline.
I'm just not sure why 100% of parents separated from their children at the border shouldn't be reunited with their parents. That leaves more than 900 parents deemed ineligible because, in some cases, the government can't find them, or they have a criminal record, or they are suspected of a crime. DOJ lawyers say 463 of those parents may have already been deported. The process is so confusing, the ACLU says, quote, things down here are a mess.
And think about this, Allie. Now those children are in U.S. custody
without parents in the
parents.
country. Well, what society thinks this is okay? This is barbarous. It's just a terrible thing to do.
You're talking about humanity. I'm going to talk about policy. We now have to house, feed, clothe, and give medical attention to those children.
It's not free.
And they're our responsibility now.
Right.
Why would we do that?
Joining us now is Robert Carey. He's the former director of the Office of Refugee Settlement in the Department of Health and Human Services. Bob, thanks very much for joining us. I just want to read this again. The Justice Department says 1,637 parents are eligible for reunification. 914 parents are deemed ineligible. You say that this administration is so inconsistent that the term eligible isn't even clear.
No, it's absolutely unclear what ineligible means. Is this because someone had a minor traffic violation 20 years ago, and is that deeming them ineligible to be reunited with their own child after the U.S. government
because in the normal criminal
them?
justice system, that wouldn't make anybody eligible.
That would be due process.
Yeah.
No, would you, an American child is not separated from his parent because of a minor infraction.
But that's the thing that I don't understand the logic. Deport them. Deport them with their children. I'm not even arguing that. What is the argument to separate them indefinitely?
And deport one parent and keep the kids here?
I think it's a punitive policy, and it has not been coherent. It was clear when this policy was implemented, if we call it a policy, that the effect on the children and the parents was not considered. The effect on how they would be reunified was not considered. The systems were not put in place to ensure that when they were forcibly taking a child from a parent, that they were matching those databases and had systems in place to reunify them.
But what about the effect on us? Did the foster care system need an additional lot of children?
Who did not need to be separated from their parents?
What contingent within the United States does this work for?
Well, none that if it's seen as a punitive measure to deter people to seek asylum, then that may be a purpose. But that's been, countless studies have shown that doesn't work. It's not effective. People are fleeing
Bob,
violence.
It's not even a goal we should have.
No.
Right? This administration has, first of all, said, reportedly told the U.S. attorneys to use the term illegal aliens instead of undocumented immigrants. And the only thing that can be behind something like that is to paint a picture of these people that makes them bad people. But seeking asylum is not a crime. If you have a credible fear of where you live, and those credible fears may not be something we understand. It might be gang violence. It might be sexual violence. It might be the collapse of the rule of law, which is occurring in some Central American countries.
Absolutely.
That is not illegal anywhere.
No, they're international accords to which the U.S. is a signatory. It's due process. It doesn't mean that they have a right to asylum.
They don't just roll in.
But they have a right to a hearing.
What's the reason why we should now say illegal aliens? What's the rationale?
It's to paint, I believe it is to paint these people who are seeking protection in the worst possible light. It's the same language that's being applied to refugees. It's demonizing people who are seeking the protection of the U.S. government, which is something that we have historically not done.
It's not where we want to be either. Bob, good to see you. Thank you. Bob Carey is a former director of the Office of Refugee Settlement. Wow.
First Lady Melania Trump doesn't want to talk about what TV channel is on Air Force One. I would love it if she would talk to us about why illegal aliens is the term preferred
Why we criminalize refugees? Why are we doing
by
this?
the U.S. government.
This is not who we are. I'm a double immigrant. I'm an immigrant to this country as well. I've chosen this country because it has a remarkable, great history of humanity. It uplifts people. That is not where we are right now. This is an ugly moment. I'm still an American, and I'm going to stay an American.
Can you
This is
also
an
make it
ugly
clear
moment.
you're not calling for open borders?
No, these people get hearings. Most of them don't get approved. 70% of the Central American refugee claimants don't get approved. We're not overrun by refugee seekers. This is just a crazy argument.
We do have a jobs problem in this country, an enormous amount of jobs left unfilled. In large part right now because we're not letting immigrants in to fill them.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.